Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will be working through how we can use Configuration Manager 2012 and then also look at Current Branch to deploy Office 365. Certainly, and more importantly, maybe even is updating Office 365. So certainly there are mechanisms outside of Configuration Manager that can be used for doing this. However, for those environments that have Configuration Manager, it makes a ton of sense to be able to leverage that infrastructure to handle the deployment and also the updating. So here's kind of where I want to go. First, just talk about deploying Office 365 with Config Manager. Kind of a few steps to get you started. It's got a couple of uniquenesses about how we even obtain the source file, so I want to walk through that. Then once we get through that process, we'll talk about updating Office 365 using Configuration Manager 2012. Wrap up just touching on Current Branch real quick because it's really, in some ways, not different. In other ways, it's just easy, to do. So anyway, that's where we're going to go. So let's start off with the deployment of Office 365 with Configuration Manager. A few things to understand about configuring Office 365. First is the need to obtain the source files that will be used for the deployment of Office 365. Office 365 is not like maybe more traditional types of software packages in that it requires that you proactively download from the web if you're going to deploy these things in an enterprise. Office 365 is designed to be deployed from the web. For home users and things, that's perfect. For enterprise environments, that's not so good. We want to have the ability to control things a bit more. So that's where the Office Deployment tool comes in. I'll show you that tool, how to use it in just a sec. Then, as part of that tool, when it comes down, there's the Office 365 configuration file. Lots of configurations that you can put on the file. Won't go through all of them. I will show you one that's an example, talk through a couple of things, but that configuration file will really drive how Office is installed. It would let you add elements to the deployment, remove elements from the deployment, define how updating works, all of those kinds of things. We'll take both of those pieces once we use Office Deployment Tool to download the source files and we have the configuration XML. We'll create a source directory in Configuration Manager for the deployment and finally set up that deployment in Configuration Manager and look at the results, which mainly is that we can launch the pieces of Office 365 like Word and so on. So let's move ahead and actually see what this looks like. Actually, I'll just start with Office 365. Let me launch a command prompt here and go to the folder where I have that, and then I have the Office Deployment Tools here. So I've already leveraged the Office Deployment Tools to pull down Office 365 source files. Just a quick directory here. The key files here, setup, is what I'm going to want to run. So this is the actual deployment tool exe. It's probably I should move it out of here. This is just something that you run. It unpacks basically setup exe and configuration.xml, right? Those are the two files that are key to getting things started. The Office folder is where some of the detail is actually created. So let me go to that folder for a minute. I'm just going to go to my desktop and then type in some things. O365, then there we go. Office Deployment Tools, good enough. So this probably is easier to look at than the command prompt. This file and this file actually are unpacked when I run this, right? This is the file or the folder that gets created that contains the Office 365 source files, right? Okay, so let me, actually I need to go back to the command prompt, don't I? Just show you real quick how to run this. Because one thing, just visually, if you look at setup.exe, here it looks like setup.exe for the Office 365 application itself. So at least in my mind, it kind of gets a little bit easy to confuse them, but separate things. So cmd, there. So if I run setup with a question mark, it just gives me the options that I have. The download is going to allow you to download the source files, and you can specify a directory, otherwise it will create the Office folder in the folder where you're running this tool from. Configure lets you add, remove, configure installation elements, and so on. Packager lets you create an app-v version of this if you want to, and so on. So, pretty easy to do. Just run this. Takes a minute to download. Office is pretty big, a gig, and so won't do it here and make you wait, but it is downloaded. You see it. So now that I have the source files, I can go back and try to use them. Let me pull in the lab, and we will look at the deployment live. So this is my Configuration Manager 2012 lab. Go to my package source folder or package folder. Go to O365. So this is kind of what you saw. You saw setup.exe. This was actually configuration.xml that I've renamed. But this now is setup.exe for Office. I also have an uninstall folder. You'll see why in just a minute. And then the Office source files right here. Okay. All right. So, and by the way, you might have noticed just clicking through, this version that I have here is different than the one that I showed you with the Office download tool. The reason why is I'm going to do an upgrade here in a minute. So there are two versions I'm working with. This is the one that I have installed. Right. So certainly the source folder, the Office files come from that process of downloading. So if you want to keep downloading the content, keep updating your source files and so on, keeping the Office deployment tool around is good, because you can just keep bringing those down as new versions come up. But anyway, right here I have the configuration, or the configuration XML renamed. So I'm going to open this with Notepad and just take a look at it. Again, this is fairly basic, but a few elements. Here's O365 Pro Plus Retail that we're deploying. Here is the internal URL where I would go download updates if I wanted to. So what does that mean? By default, Office is configured to self-update. It will go out and check and find out if there are new binaries that we need to download. Whenever the config XML is updated, that will trigger some of that. And there's other things too. In a enterprise environment, you really don't want probably the client to go to the internet and try to download content, right? So there's another option, which is you can store that content internally on a website. So this is an example of that, right? So if you want to do that, cool. We can, right? It gets into the whole discussion about content deployment networks and so on that are very important for Office 365, but really not part of the Config Manager discussion. So I'm focusing purely on that right now. And then if you're using Config Manager, though, you don't want your clients probably to go here at all, even if it's an internal link to download the content. You want Config Manager to do that. Right? So if you want Config Manager to do that, you need to change this element to false. By default, it's true. By changing it to false, you're basically telling the client, don't go try to update yourself. Config Manager will drive that. Right? And so, or something else will drive that. And then other things about EULAs and so on. So this is the config XML. Will cause the configuration to be a certain way when we deploy. Right? Now you see the source directory too. So the elements that I pulled down with the Office deployment tool, I simply plug into the source directory. I do have the uninstall. So inside the uninstall is just simply a VB script, Office Scrub, because that is a tool that is produced that really helps cleanly remove Office from a system if you need to uninstall. So I include it here in the source directory. All right, so let's actually go look at this in Configuration Manager and see how it would be deployed. So you see in software libraries, I go into it and look at applications, that I do have an application created for Office 365 deployment. So the question that comes in right away maybe is, should you use an application or should you use a package? And the answer is, it really depends on you. The application model gives you more capabilities, more configurations and so on. So the application model is a great choice. However, if you wanted to deploy this through a package, you can. There's nothing special that would require an application, but certainly would encourage you to consider, the application. So let's look at the properties of this. Really nothing special that we want to even look at except in the deployment type. So, very simple, nothing different than normal. And so I'm going to go edit this deployment type. And then the content is simply my source directory. And then the programs, here's my install. So just simply setup.exe, configure, and then I pass in the name of the XML. That will do the install. Here's my uninstall command using the Office Scrubber, right? And that's really it. I mean, I have some detection methods just to make sure the folder exists. Requirements don't have any, right? Very, very simple. And so I run this. I've actually already installed it because it takes a minute. I don't want to wait for it. I've actually installed this. This is my test client as well. So if I just go to Word, as an example, it does pop up, Word 2013. It is the Office 365 version, and so on, right? You can dig into this, see the versions if you wanted to, but it is, trust me, Office 365 installed on the machine fully. I could pull up Excel, pull up other things, and so on. So we know it's installed. One other key place that you would need to be aware of anyway, probably don't have to be aware of it, but it's good to know about it, is in the registry. So if we go look at the Office install in the registry, there's a key place that at least I want to show you. So under click to run and configuration. So this is some of the detail anyway about where we're going to go for certain things, like our content deployment network. This is the location for it. If I'm going to allow updates internally, then this is the URL for that. So this is the exact URL that I showed you in the configuration file. It just gets stamped into the registry as part of the install, and some other things here. So we'll come back to the registry in just a minute. All right, so that real quick is the installation of Office, right? So what we need to do now is really shift our attention to how we go about performing the update of Office. And so if I go click next, we have a couple of thoughts. So really, the updating of Office through ConfigMgr is a little bit of a unique process. It's not bad. It's just that whenever this was first built, ConfigMgr wasn't built out yet as far as being able to use it for updating. There were a couple of tools that needed to be built to help use ConfigMgr effectively for Office 365 updating. I'll show you those now, right? And ConfigMgr is a great way to update Office 365 in 2012 as well as current branch. So really the approach is what I want to show you. So first of all, let me pull the lab back in, my 2012 lab. Let's go back to my source directory. Okay. So here you see the O365 folder, but I also have an O365 update folder, right? So that brings in the first question: is it necessary to have a unique upgrade folder for Office 365? No, strictly it's not necessary, but I think it makes a lot of sense to keep your updates separate from your install. And certainly as you go forward with an upgrade, you'll want to version up your install folder as well with the latest binaries and so on, right? But it just makes sense to me to keep them separate. If you want to combine them, that's fine. A few key elements, though, to call out. So this should look very similar. The only difference here is there's no configuration.xml, right? Don't need it for the upgrade. We already know how it's configured, and so we can just simply uplift. What is here, though, is this thing called SCO 365 PP trigger, right? Really what this is the executable that will help drive this whole thing, right? In order to allow ConfigMgr to effectively in order to allow Office 365 to effectively leverage the Configuration Manager environment, there has to be a process that goes out and figures out what the closest distribution point is, and then adjust the registry so that that distribution point can be leveraged instead for updating, and then kicks off the update process. Right? Now, little asterisks here. So this process is designed for config manager distribution points. I've never tried it with something like branch cache or Nomad or whatever, Adaptiva, but I question whether it would work. It might, right? But here we specifically are pointing the registry to a distribution point location. This process works outside of config manager. It's driven by this executable. So for those reasons, it almost certainly would not. In fact, I'm very certain saying it wouldn't work with Adaptiva and things like that. Wanting Nomad and so on, right? But if we go forward to Configuration Manager 2016, Configuration Manager current branch, there are options that could help us be able to leverage those other technologies as well. More on that in a minute. So we have this as our source folder. One other uniqueness, so if I look in Office under Data, let me just do the comparison here. So I'll pull up this original source folder. So this is my O365 deployment folder, and if I look here, notice the difference. This was deploying version 4779. That's what I have installed. This is going to be the upgrade. So it has both 4779 and 4815. The key here also that's not immediately visible is this file right here must be from 4815. Whatever version you're upgrading to is where that file should come from, right? Okay, so I have that, and I've created a deployment for it. Now, let's go look at the deployment. If I go back to Software Library, you see there's no upgrade here. If you look at packages, this is where you see, actually I've got a couple that I created, the upgrade package. So the question is, why do I do the deployment as an application but the upgrade as a package? And the answer is very simple. In order to do this effectively, we have to leverage the run from DP option, right? It's not that it's even running it from DP, kind of really. It's just that we need to make those source files available on the DP, the old style DP share. And to do that, we have to use a package. You can't do that with an application, right? So if I go into the properties of this package, nothing, actually the package is pretty standard. Go to the property of the programs. This is where you'll see the configuration. And here is just the command line. Notice the command line is the trigger executable with logging to tell us how things are going, and requirements or environment, whether or not a user's logged on is fine. Another thing I will show you on the package, you don't have to set it here, but it shows up here. Let's see. Here. Copy the content of the package to distribution points. Package share on distribution points. I didn't check this box. There's actually two places you can set it, here and the actual deployment. If you set it in either place, it'll do what we want it to do, right? But setting it on the deployment will cause this to be set as well. So let's look at the deployment real quick. In the deployment specifically for distribution points, I'm telling it to run from DP in both places, right? So I actually have this. I've deployed it out, and it's in Software Center. So let's go kick this off, the upgrade, and see how it runs. So we'll click Install. So it's going to go do its thing, and you see it kicking off. It was already downloaded to the cache, and off we go. So we're downloading Office updates. That'll take a while, and so I won't labor the process, but you see just that quickly we're going and using the Config Manager distribution point. So one other thing I'll quickly show you is the log. So there is a log created when we run this process. It's under Windows Temp here, and then I'll just sort by date modified. Here, okay, this log is created whenever we run that executable, and what it does, it'll show you we're actually opening the registry key, looking for the registry key, found the distribution point path. There's code to do it. This points directly to my legacy distribution point and package ID. We're going to update the registry to point there, so now we're intercepting what was listed in the configuration.xml and inserting the config manager distribution point, and then we're done, right? So if we go back to the registry, this is where it started. This was just a URL. If I update this, it is now the configuration manager distribution point, and that's where we pulled our code from. All right, and there's other things around this too, in terms of arguments you can put on to determine how this works. There is the default argument that's called here to do the updating and so on, right? So that's how we do configure or do the Office 365 updating in Configuration Manager 2012. No other way to do it, right? That's the way, and not all that hard either. It's pretty easy, just a couple of elements you have to get familiar with. All right, so I'll go ahead and close all this out and move my 2012 site out of the way. So if that's the way we do it in 2012, how do we do it in current branch, right? And the answer is it depends. Okay, so I'm not going to show you in detail current branch, but I will show you briefly because that's really all it will take. If I pull in my current branch environment, if I can get the mouse to work for me, if I pull in my current branch environment, you'll quickly see that if you go to the software updates node, the updates are now presented as software updates, right? So I was saying before that in some cases with current branch you'll be able to take advantage of things like branch cache or One Nomad or Adaptiva because it's just a normal config manager process. You deploy the update, it does its thing. If you're using those third-party products or branch cache, then it works, right? The catch is this is only workable for Office 2016. It is not workable for Office 2013 or anything before, right? So if you are still in the place where you need to support Office 2013, even in current branch, you need to proceed with the Config Manager 2012 approach that I just described, right? Or choose one of the other approaches like the Content Deployment Network or direct updating or whatever you want, right? So, but as we move forward to Office 2016, it's going to be a much better experience for you in current branch just using software updates, right? All right, so that really quickly. But hopefully in a way that helps you understand, covers what I wanted to about Office 365 with Configuration Manager. So we will see you next time.